This podcast is brought to you by the Maryland State Library Agency. The MSLA podcast features presenters from statewide youth programs, as well as learning opportunities for library staff and resources for patrons of the Maryland State Library for the blind and print disabled.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to a live LBPD live program for hurricane preparedness. I am so excited to have our special guest today, and we will be discussing hurricane preparedness, like what is a hurricane, where did it come from, and what we need to do to be safe. And Steve LaVoie is a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, NWS, forecast office in West Columbia, South Carolina, and an NOAA Ambassador. He has been with NWS for 3 years. Born and raised in Massachusetts, Steve has always been passionate about the world of weather. It was the passage of Hurricane Bob in August of 1991 that set him firmly on the path of becoming a meteorologist. Steve earned his Bachelor of Science in Meteorology from, I'm going to pronounce this as Lyndon State College, which is now Vermont State University, and his Master's of Science in Geography from Ball State University. Welcome, Steve.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me on the show, Ash.
I'm so excited that you're here. Now Hurricane Bob in 1991, I don't remember that hurricane. I do remember the snow blizzard from the 90s, but the hurricane. So how did that set you into the path of meteorology?
Great question. And so I feel like I had always had that passion for meteorology, but I had just turned 6 the summer that Bob moved into New England. And what really fascinated me was the aftermath of Hurricane Bob. So while the damage on my street was limited to more just twigs down, leaves down, a couple streets over, they had intense destruction. Just a couple streets down, we had nearly every tree was felled, power lines down, and it was likely due to just a very local enhancement of the wind. In the meteorology world, we call that a microburst. So it was just the amazing scope of the devastation and how in such a short distance you could have such a great differential in the damage. It just really set me into that passion. And I said, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And I was one of those lucky ones who was able to pursue that dream all the way through.
Oh, that is so cool. So cool. The for being so young to know exactly what you want to do, that's kind of hard. At 6 years old, I think I was like, I'm going to be an astronaut.
Yeah, you'll find it's really commonplace in certain fields, meteorology being one of them. I know that we're running a poll right now at the office, and I saw, a lot of single digits when people got involved in meteorology. A lot in the 5 through 7 area, actually.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I'm going to ask you the first question that's on everybody's mind. Sure. What exactly is a hurricane?
All right. Well, starting things off, a hurricane is a type of low pressure system, and we call these tropical cyclones. So all tropical cyclones develop over the tropical or subtropical oceans of our world. Typically, they form between 10 and 40 degrees north and south of the equator. The term hurricane is given to tropical cyclones with maximum sustained winds in excess of 73 miles per hour that form either in the Atlantic Ocean or the northeastern Pacific Ocean. Tropical storms, the category below that, are tropical cyclones with winds between 39 and 73 miles per hour. And at that point, that they would receive a name. The category below that is with winds less than 39 miles per hour, and those are called tropical depressions.
So where do hurricanes come from then?
Hurricanes, as mentioned, they are tropical cyclones. They form over the tropical or subtropical waters of our world. And one reason that they form from these areas of low pressure in the tropics is because there are very deep and warm waters there. So they form over the ocean. They're just areas of low pressure like we have that move across the United States. But one critical component is the fact that they do need those very warm waters, typically greater than 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And hurricanes actually often weaken when they are deprived of that heat source by moving over the cooler waters, bringing up colder waters from beneath the ocean surface, or making landfall and being deprived of the ocean. You also need some sort of pre-existing area of low pressure. They typically, in our basin, the Atlantic Ocean, form over the middle of the continent of Africa. So a lot of our big hurricanes actually start off as just a massive cluster of thunderstorms over Africa and then tend to move over the water and start to develop as they move across the Atlantic basin.
So how strong do these winds get? Because I mean, I'm thinking a hurricane at like 5 miles an hour is to me like devastating. What would it be? I mean, like how big does it get?
Yes, excellent question. Hurricanes are capable of producing incredibly destructive winds, with the most powerful hurricanes, which we would rate a category 5 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, have a maximum sustained winds in excess of 155 miles per hour. For example, Hurricane Beryl earlier this month was a category 5. The strongest hurricane on record is Hurricane Patricia. That was back in 2015 in the Eastern Pacific. It had sustained winds of 215 miles per hour. It weakened to 150 miles per hour when it made landfall on the Pacific coast of Mexico. It was the strongest landfalling Pacific hurricane until last year when Hurricane Otis made landfall near Acapulco, Mexico, and that had winds of 160 miles per hour, making it a category 5 at landfall. The strongest hurricane here in the Atlantic was Hurricane Wilma. That was in the year 2005, and at peak it had winds of 185 miles per hour. Now, of course, the state of Maryland is well removed from the tropics, but we have still seen our fair share of tropical threats. The last hurricane to impact Maryland was Hurricane Irene in 2011, which passed just off the coast. And the last tropical storm to impact Maryland directly was Tropical Storm Elsa in 2021.
180, you said 185 miles an hour.
Yes.
That's
that is
NASCAR speed. You realize that? That's
Yes.
like NASCAR speed.
Yes. These winds are incredibly destructive. Luckily, when it comes to these, it's only if you're near the core of the hurricane where you get to experience those. The winds do drop off pretty quickly as you move away from the center in most situations. Those most intense hurricanes, usually within the 50 miles from the center, if that sometimes.
So what type of weather hazards can a hurricane actually bring then? I mean, I'm thinking winds of 185 miles an hour, there's got to be more to it.
Yes, exactly. And so a landfalling hurricane can bring a variety of hazards in addition to the winds and the damage they produce. Along the coast, storm surge is a very serious concern. We define storm surge as the wind-driven rise in water above tidal levels, so above your normal typical tide, that typically accompanies landfalling tropical cyclones and does not include the waves. Storm surge is typically really determines which coastal communities will be asked to evacuate ahead of a tropical cyclone. Heavy rainfall and flooding are also hazards that are not just limited to the coast, but also well inland. For example, Hurricane Agnes back in 1972 was only a tropical storm when it impacted the mid-Atlantic states, but it still produced excessive rainfall totals over 10 inches in parts of New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia, causing destructive flooding across the region. Many of our listeners will probably remember the impacts from Agnes. Hurricanes are also capable of producing tornadoes. Under the right conditions, landfalling tropical cyclones can produce dozens of tornadoes, with the current record belonging to Hurricane Ivan from 2004. It produced 120 confirmed tornadoes, including 9 that impacted the state of Maryland.
Sorry, I'm a little shook. You're saying a hurricane can cause a tornado?
That is correct. Yes, we often see that. Going back to even Beryl this year, there were many tornadoes. We'll have to see how many ultimately to see if it challenges Ivan's record. But hurricanes are comprised of thunderstorms, and the conditions are very favorable when a tropical cyclone makes landfall for those tornadoes to develop within the rain bands of the hurricane.
So all of this makes me wonder, what's the difference between a typhoon and a hurricane then?
That is a question we often get as meteorologists. And the pretty interesting answer is there is no fundamental difference between a typhoon and a hurricane. As I mentioned earlier, we use the term hurricane to describe winds, a tropical cyclone with winds in excess of 73 miles per hour if it forms in the Atlantic Ocean or northeastern Pacific Ocean. Now, the term typhoon is used for these same systems exclusively in the northwestern Pacific basin. So, typhoons impact countries such as Japan, China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. A tropical cyclone with those winds that forms anywhere else besides that, so we're talking anywhere in the southern hemisphere or the northern Indian Ocean, then we just call them cyclones. So a notable cyclone that hit Australia was Cyclone Steve in the year 2000.
So this has me wondering how long does this season last, especially in the Atlantic?
Yes, and so in the Atlantic basin, the traditional bounds of hurricane season run from June 1st through November 30th. So we're about 6 weeks into the current hurricane season. However, tropical storms have been recorded in the Atlantic basin during every month of the year. This is most commonly for off-season in May and December. However, the last off-season tropical cyclone was an unnamed subtropical storm that formed off the coast of New England in January 2023.
That's a long time.
Absolutely. It's about half the year.
So we're 6 weeks in, and I didn't see any mad rush to the grocery store or anything like that on the news. But, what kind of things should I be like subtly stocking up on,
Mhm.
before a hurricane comes?
Sure. So, a hurricane has the potential to cause disruptions in the delivery of goods and services. Unfortunately, we saw that with Beryl in Houston. And so, number one, it's a really good idea to fill up on your gas tanks when you're expecting a hurricane. So, ahead of a storm, you think there might be a chance, make sure all of your vehicles are fully stocked up, fully gassed up, ready to go. If you take medication, it would be prudent to make sure that you have several weeks worth on hand so you don't run out. Because after a hurricane, the pharmacies may have that disruption of services. It may take them a while to get your medication back in stock. Other items that you want to stock up on would be a week's worth of food and water. So you don't need to prepare for the end of the world, but you should have at least a week on hand if we're expecting a hurricane. You should have batteries and any first aid supplies you need. So everyone should have a first aid kit. Make sure to take that opportunity to check on them. Make sure, okay, I need some band-aids. Well, make sure you get some band-aids now so that they don't run out quickly. In addition, all of these things should be part of your disaster preparedness kit. So if you don't already have a disaster preparedness kit, and you want to make sure that it's also in your designated safe room, other items that should be in there, you should stock up for now, include a portable light source. So a battery powered lantern, flashlights. I wouldn't advise candles personally. Of course, that's an open flame, there's a danger there. So something that's non flammable would be preferred. An official NOAA weather radio is really critical, even in this day and age. For example, if you lose power, if the cell towers go down, NOAA weather radio may be the only way for you to get the latest weather information for a time. In addition, you want to have a change of clothes for each member of your family, and that includes a pair of old shoes. And that's in case there's debris outside of your chosen safe room. And finally, for those with children or grandchildren, make sure that you have a few choice activities already there, some coloring books, something to occupy their time. And then, of course, supplies for babies and pets if needed. So it all depends on your personal situation. But if you have children, grandchildren, babies, or pets, make sure to keep them in mind and just have a small supply ready for them. You shouldn't be in your safe room for too long, but you want to be there just in case. And again, you should have a designated safe room, not just for hurricanes, but other types of weather disasters as well, such as tornadoes.
And those safe rooms should not have windows, correct?
That's correct. Yes. So if you don't have a safe room already picked out at your home, you want to have an interior room on the first floor, ideally, and it should be windowless. In a in a pinch, you could always go under the stairs if that works. And of course, a basement would be even better in most situations. So that could be your designated safe room, but only if you're not in a flood-prone area.
So my fiance is a mini. I call him a mini doomsday prepper.
Ah,
And he when we had this last round of storms that they said there was a tornado watch for our area.
Mhm.
He was like, bug out bags downstairs. So, I mean, I totally get where you're coming from because I live with it now.
Yes.
So we talked about preparing ourselves, but how do we prepare our home? Because, that's a big investment.
Yes. And so to prepare for your home, it'll depend on where you're located. Coastal residents need to prepare their homes for the strong winds and potential storm surge. So you need to have supplies on hand, such as plywood to cover up your windows and other exposed, entryways, a portable generator, and a battery-powered sump pump in case the lowest level of your home ends up being flooded. If you're inland, though, you also need to be prepared for river flooding, freshwater flooding. So if you know you live in a flood prone area, you should also take efforts to move your valuables to a higher level of your home if you can. And I know that's not possible for everyone, especially with little limited prep time. You should also have those supplies on hand to power and repair your home if needed. If you have the time, if there is enough time available and you have the tools or the people available to assist, you should consider trimming trees around your property. And that way, that'll decrease the risk of any flying debris hitting your home and potentially damaging your property, breaking your windows, and things like that.
So a lot of forethought has to kind of go into this.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's say that hurricanes happen and we have prepared our house, we prepared ourselves, and the hurricane's finally gone. Are we safe immediately after a hurricane's left?
That is a great question. And the answer is no. There are many lingering threats after a hurricane has left the area. These can include downed trees, dangerous floodwaters, and damaged infrastructure. You can have situations where there'll be sewer backups. So you don't know what's in that water. In addition, the water can obscure maybe some sharp debris. So you're at the risk of hurting yourself from something you can't see. And of course, there could be animals in the water as well. So definitely we have to worry about downed trees, dangerous floodwaters, and of course, other damaged infrastructure. Depending on the severity of the event, it may take days, weeks, or even months in some cases before the recovery efforts are completed. Just because the power lines, if you come across a power line, just because they're down does not mean they're inactive. So you don't want to touch any down power lines or try to move them out of the way. So there's a lot of concerns there, and you want to use extreme caution after a hurricane passes if you choose to stay in your home because of all these various threats, down trees, down power lines, and then of course the unseen threat from floodwaters. Never drive through flooded roadways.
That's good advice right there. I've seen too many news stories about people trapped in their car because they were like, "Oh, it's just a little water." No, it turned out to be like 5 feet.
Yeah, unfortunately, I saw some footage of that even from Beryl in the Houston area. So we
Oh,
had many water rescues from that one.
I want to back up a second.
Sure.
I asked if the hurricanes left or what we do when a hurricane's left, but it dawned on me that I really should also ask, how do I get the latest information about that hurricane to make sure that it's actually gone?
Yes. Okay. So, folks, the best source for hurricane information is from the National Hurricane Center, NHC for short. And that information is readily available online at hurricanes.gov. Hurricanes.gov. The NHC is responsible for issuing tropical cyclone advisories and warnings. So, that's in addition to your tropical storm, hurricane, and storm surge watches and warnings. They're doing that as well. You should also book the web address and social media accounts for your local National Weather Service or NWS office. For most of those listening today, this is going to be the office in Sterling, Virginia. They cover most of Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia. If you happen to be in Maryland and live in Kent, Queen Anne's, Talbot, or Caroline counties on the Eastern Shore, your local office is the one located in Mount Holly, New Jersey, which also covers Delaware, southeastern Pennsylvania, and most of the state of New Jersey. Finally, for the remaining counties on the eastern shore of Maryland, that's going to be Dorchester, Wicomico, Somerset, and I believe Worcester. Your local office is Wakefield, Virginia, and they cover southeastern Virginia, northeastern Carolina, and again, those select counties on the eastern shore. Your local NWS forecast office will provide updates on the hurricane that are specifically tailored to your forecast area and will issue inland tropical storm watches and warnings and other products such as tornado warnings and flash flood watches and warnings.
So these NWS offices really do cover everything, right?
Yes.
Everything in Maryland.
Yes. Every county in the United States is covered by a Weather Service forecast office. And so we handle a lot of the smaller, finer, detailed forecast for you guys. The Hurricane Center is kind of the overseeing, they have the bird's eye view. So again, they're the ones issuing the coastal advisories, but you want to make sure you know which office is issuing your tornado warnings, your severe thunderstorm warnings. For example, even South Carolina is covered by 4 different offices. Here in Columbia, we cover what we call the Midlands. So that's kind of the middle part of the state, if you imagine. And then even some counties around Augusta, Georgia. And so it does vary from office to office. And most offices, at least particularly in the eastern side, will cover multiple states.
So this is where having an NOAA radio would come in handy, because if the internet's down.
You're correct. You've got it, Ashley. And so that is where you can get immediate warnings. That is still the best source in this day and age. With all the technology we have, a NOAA weather radio is indeed the best source to have, because any warning will automatically go to you. And warnings in particular, such as tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings, now have same technology. And what that means is you can program your weather radio so that you only get alerts that are in your particular location.
Isn't it funny? We have more technology in our cell phone than it took to land a man on the moon. But when it comes to making sure that we're safe during extreme weather surges, we rely on a radio service. I think that's amazing. I think that's great.
Yes, yeah, and absolutely. That's because again, it's kind of the last line of defense when your power goes out. Again, it's battery operated, and the cell phone towers are gone, and your Wi-Fi is gone. It's kind of that last bastion. And of course, most NOAA weather radios, I did want to mention, are kind of a 3-in-1 deal where you can also get your local news. So you get a standard radios built in and a flashlight. In fact, the one that we have here at the office even has a little warning beacon. It's kind of an outdoor one.
We have a crank one.
Yes. Ours has a crank as well. So even better, it's better than battery powered. It's actually kind of solar powered and hand powered. So the ultimate in preparedness.
I told you, my fiance is like a mini doomsday prepper.
There is nothing wrong with being prepared. We at the Weather Service have kind of the idea that it's better to be proactive than reactive. And so we take that into our warning methodology. So we have a lot of technology available, and this goes to any Weather Service offices, including up in Maryland, where we have as many resources available so that we can kind of see the storm develop. And then more importantly, when it's more likely to produce severe weather, and we can get those warnings out as quickly as possible, as opposed to being reactive where something develops unexpectedly, and then we have to get out a warning where maybe it's.
Well, speaking of being proactive, I know that I don't want to be sitting around in a hurricane. So, can you tell me when someone should leave the area?
Yes, absolutely. And the good news is that the majority of people with a landfalling hurricane do not need to evacuate when a hurricane approaches. The most important thing you can do is find out if you live and or work in an evacuation zone, a flood zone, or both. State officials will determine which locations need to be evacuated. Usually, again, it's based on the expected storm surge. And they will issue either a voluntary or mandatory evacuation order to the impacted communities. Storm surge, again, is a threat in Maryland, and not just along the Atlantic coast, as many would think, but also those living along parts of the Chesapeake Bay and inland rivers. If a mandatory evacuation order is issued for your area, it is strongly encouraged that you heed the order, as emergency services will likely be overtaxed during and after a hurricane. Staying inside a mandatory evacuation zone during a hurricane not only puts the lives of you and your family at risk, but also those first responders who need to respond to whatever emergency you have. And the same applies to residents in a flood zone. If you know your home and or workplace is in one of these zones, then the emergency plan should be to include, I know I'm going to stay on Frida during the duration of this event. So you need to have a friend or family member who is not in the evacuation zone, not in a flood zone, and know, okay, I can go stay with her for the duration of the storm. Or it might be, okay, I'm going to go to this hotel. Like I know where I'm going to evacuate to. And of course, tourists are often the first people that are asked to leave when a hurricane approaches. So if you're planning a vacation down to Ocean City this hurricane season, make sure that you have a backup plan in case you're asked to leave.
I forgot about Ocean City. Oops. All right. So I have to evacuate. What should I be taking with me?
All right. Excellent question, because obviously we can't take our whole houses in most cases, and we don't have all the time in the world. Typically, a hurricane warning and a storm surge warning goes up about 36 hours prior to landfall. And so that isn't the longest window in the world. So if you're asked to evacuate, take your emergency supply kit with you. So you should already have that ready to go. In addition to any medication, a toiletry bag, because you never know. You don't want to rely on, just picking up supplies along the road, and a few changes of clothes. Obviously, you don't know when the next time you'll be able to wash your clothes is. So yeah, make sure you have a couple pairs just in case. You may not have time to gather those belongings, so it's always a good idea to have important documents such as a birth certificate, social security card. If you're a homeowner, the deed to your house, all of those important documents should already be in a fireproof box, and it should be sitting in that your designated area for your emergencies, your safe room. And finally, a good thing not everyone thinks about in this modern world is have some cash on hand. You could always throw that in the firebox too. And that's in case ATMs are unavailable. You want to make sure that you're able to readily have cash, maybe a couple $100 if you can spare it, just sitting in an envelope, and then you're ready to go in case there is a disaster. And I do say fireproof box because, of course, that way you're also covering yourself in the event that there's a fire at your home.
I didn't think about taking cash. Honestly, I didn't think because I don't think I've carried cash in years.
I'm the same way, but honestly, you have to think that way because, again, you might not have. Imagine that you do have to evacuate quickly, and if you had cash on hand, maybe there was a power outage or something happened with the system, and you need gas right now. So you want to have it because you never know. So just have a little cash in that box, and then you're good to go.
I'm kind of just in a little bit of this. I don't know what to call it. Like my mind's not blown, but I'm sitting there going, "Oh my god, the things you have to think about ahead of time."
Yes.
This has been great advice. What else do you have to tell us about hurricanes?
Well, hurricane season is here, and the threat for a tropical storm or hurricane in the state of Maryland will just increase in the next few months. The typical peak of hurricane season is around the 10th of September, and so we still have a couple more weeks before we reach peak hurricane season. So what you want to do is take the appropriate actions right now. I hope I've inspired some of you to go out now. Make sure you're not caught off guard from an approaching tropical cyclone. So this includes many of the tips we already covered, such as gathering supplies ahead of time and knowing if your home is in an evacuation zone or flood-prone area. And even outside of this hurricane season, you should have an emergency action plan ready to go for your home in case a different disaster, such as a severe snowstorm or tornado, impacts your community. This means building or updating your emergency preparedness kit and designating a space in your home as your safe room. As I mentioned, if your home is not designated to withstand those strong winds, or you just don't have a good spot for a safe room, your plan should include a location to evacuate to, such as your friend or family member's home. And I really hope these tips will help you make more informed decisions for this hurricane season.
So the tips and everything that you gave us actually applies to any severe weather.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. I didn't think about having a disaster preparedness kit for a snowstorm.
Yes, same type of situation can happen. Again, and if it's a really bad snowstorm, you're going to have a situation where your emergency response may be a little bit slowed. The roads may be blocked. And so you want to be able to at least do the initial first aid if something were to happen. I remember there was a situation with a blizzard in Buffalo, New York in the 70s, I believe, where there was a massive fire. A fire started at one home, the winds carried it to the next home, and unfortunately, the fire crew couldn't get there. So many homes were lost. We even saw that with Hurricane Sandy. There was a community on Long Island that was completely decimated by fire. The response was very slow, and they weren't able to get there because of the storm surge.
I remember Hurricane Sandy. That was I was living in Covington, Louisiana at the time,
Oh, wow.
and so I remember. I mean, it made the news down there. It was such a devastating hurricane.
Yep. So we want to make sure you guys are ready just in case we have a hurricane this year. And again, it just these tips aren't always exclusive to hurricanes, because even just a couple months ago, Maryland had a pretty bad tornado outbreak.
We certainly did. Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I have. And I'm thrilled, absolutely thrilled that you are here today. I encourage everyone to re-listen to this podcast just so that you have a really good understanding of what hurricanes are, where they came from, and how to prepare yourself in the event that a hurricane makes landfall here in Maryland. The other thing that I'm going to do is give a plug to our BARD service. So with severe weather, you may not be able to get your books through the mail, as many do. So you may choose to download books directly to your smart device. That will help with that entertainment value, especially if you're stuck in a basement for a few days. And finally, do remember that the NFB Newsline offers a severe weather alerts. You can call in and listen to the severe weather alerts through NFB Newsline, which, if you are a member of our library, you have access to for free. So do remember to sign up for NFB Newsline if you have not already. Well, Steve, I want to thank you so much for being here, and encourage everyone to, again, listen to this twice because it's a lot of information.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast today, Ashley. And I want to make sure everyone listening today always remain weather aware.
I like that. Weather aware. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here and say thank you to everyone who attended. And this was our first time doing an LBPD live podcast. So hopefully we'll have more in the future, which will be great. Steve, thank you for being our guinea pig.
Happy to help. Thank you again for inviting me.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
This has been a presentation of the Maryland State Library Agency. For links to additional resources provided by today's presenter, please visit the show notes. For more information on MSLA or the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, visit marylandlibraries.org.